Okay, guys, so today we're going to be talking about perpendicular lines, all right? Um, Perpendicular are two lines that cross at a perfect intersection at 90-degree angles. So I'm going to draw real quick a picture of what perpendicular looks like. Okay, so perpendicular lines actually cross each other, which means that their slopes cannot be the same. We know two lines are perpendicular if their slopes are opposite reciprocals. All right, opposite reciprocals. All right, so on line 1, it gives me the equation y equals negative x plus 5. So we have to find the slope of the given line. So remember, we identify our x and look at the number in front of it. It's actually a negative 1. Okay, what opposite means? The opposite part means change the sign. So my given slope was a negative, so I know my perpendicular slope will be a positive. The reciprocal part means flip it. Well, if I turn that into a fraction, I can put it over 1. If I flip 1 over 1, it's still just 1. So negative 1 and positive 1 are opposite reciprocals. Let's try the next one. Okay, y equals 2/3 x plus 7. So identify the given slope. So look at your x. The slope is the number in front. So my slope is 2/3. So any line that's perpendicular to that line will have a slope of an opposite reciprocal. So my given slope was a positive. So my perpendicular slope would be a negative. Reciprocal means flip it. So if I flip 2 over 3, it's going to be 3 over 2. On my next equation, I find my x. So the given slope is a negative 3. So to find the perpendicular slope, I need to take the opposite reciprocal. So if the given slope is a negative, I know the perpendicular slope will be a positive, and I'm going to flip it. So I'm actually going to change this fraction into, I'm going to change negative 3 to a fraction by putting it over 1. So if I flip that, instead of having a 3 over 1, it's going to be a 1 over 3. So opposite, I changed the negative into a positive, and I flipped it. So instead of 3 over 1, it's now 1 over 3. Okay, so y equals 5. Notice I'm missing my x's, so it's a strange one. The y equals, so I'm going to use Hoy. So I know y equals 5. The h stands for a horizontal, so y equals 5 is a horizontal line. So I know its slope is 0. Okay, we're not really going to do the opposite reciprocal of this one because what type of line would I need in order to be perpendicular to this guy? A horizontal line. Well, I would need a vertical line. And I know vertical lines have, it's not working for me. That U has helped me to remember what type of slope this guy has, which is undefined slope. Let me see if I can write this a little bit clearer. Okay, so x equals 2. Notice the y is missing, so it's a strange one, so I'm going to use VUX to help me figure that one out. V stands for vertical, so I know x equals 2 would be a vertical line. And that U helps me remember that vertical lines have an undefined slope. Okay, so if I want to make it perpendicular to a vertical line, I know I'm going to need a horizontal line. And a horizontal line has 0 slope. All right, on this next one, unfortunately, y is not by itself, so I'm going to have to solve for it. First, by taking away 3x's from each side. So I'm going to be left with 2y equals 6 minus 3x. Next, to get rid of that 2, I'm going to divide both sides by 2 and get y equals, first I have a 6 divided by 2, which is 3. Then I have negative 3x divided by 2, which is going to give me a negative 3 over 2x. Now that y is by itself, find your slope by looking in front of your x. It is a negative 3 over 2. Okay, so to find the slope of a line that's perpendicular to it, I'm going to take the opposite reciprocal. Opposite, change the sign. So if this sign is a negative, the perpendicular slope would be a positive. Reciprocal, flip it. So instead of having 3 over 2, I'm going to have 2 over 3. All right, last one. To find slope, we're going to get y by itself by first taking away 2 x's from each side. So that's going to leave me with a negative y equals a negative 5 minus 2x. Okay, y is not by itself because it has a negative out front, so I'm going to multiply the entire thing by another negative, which remember makes everything opposite. So the opposite of that negative y is a positive y. The opposite of that negative 5 is a positive 5. The opposite of a minus 2x is a plus 2x. Now that y is by itself, identify the number by the x. So my slope is a positive 2. So if I want to find the slope of any line that's perpendicular to that line, I have to do the opposite reciprocal. So this slope is a positive, so I know the perpendicular slope would be a negative. And reciprocal means flip it. Well, 2 is not a fraction, so I'm going to turn it into a fraction by putting it over 1. So flip it. Instead of 2 over 1, it's going to be 1 over 2. Okay, so we're going to write an equation in slope-intercept form of a line that goes through the given point and is perpendicular to the graph given. Okay, so, to the equation given. So first, let's identify the slope that it gave me. The slope that is given to me, is 3. I don't want to use the same slope. My perpendicular slope, remember you have to take the opposite reciprocal. Well, this slope is a positive number, so I know my perpendicular slope will be a negative. And we have to take the reciprocal, which means flip it. Well, 3 is not a fraction, so I'm going to turn it into a fraction by putting it over 1. So if I flip 3 over 1, it's going to be 1 over 3. So the given slope was a positive 3. Therefore, a perpendicular line will have a slope of negative 1/3. Change the sign, flip it. Okay, so this is the slope I want to use, but I want it to go through this point. So I'm going to have to find my new y-intercept. So here's my x and my y value. So I'm going to have to plug in to solve for my b, my y-intercept. All right, the point tells me my y is negative 2. We said our perpendicular slope is a negative 1/3, and the x for my point is a 6. Okay, we need to solve for b. So I'm going to take negative 1/3 and I'm going to multiply it by 6. That's going to give me a negative 2. So on that side I have negative 2 plus b. On the other side, my negative 2 drops down. To get rid of a negative 2, I'm going to add 2 to both sides. So my b drops. So I know b is equal to negative 2 plus 2, which is 0. So I have my slope and I have my y-intercept. I can write my equation. So y equals, you put your slope followed by x, and then you put your y-intercept. I'm not going to leave it like that, guys, because a plus 0 is not necessary. So overall, my final answer is y equals negative 1/3 x. Okay, so I want my line to go through this point and be perpendicular to this line. So first I'm going to identify the slope given to me in this equation, which is a negative 2 over 3. So let's figure out our perpendicular slope. So I'm going to take the opposite reciprocal. So opposite, since this slope is a negative, mine's going to be a positive. Reciprocal, flip it. It says 2 over 3, so I'm going to put 3 over 2. So I know if this guy has a slope of negative 2/3, a A perpendicular line will have a slope of a positive 3 over 2. Okay, so we have our slope. Now we just have to find our y-intercepts. So we're going to solve for b. Okay, the y from my point is a negative 5. My perpendicular slope is a positive 3/2. The x for my point is 4. And my plus b drops down. So let's solve. 3 over 2 times 4 is 6. My plus b drops. And so does my negative 5 on the other side. Get rid of that 6 by taking away 6 from both sides. Negative 5 subtract 6 is a negative 11. So I know that b is negative 11. So now that I have my slope and my y-intercept, I can write my equation. Y equals 3 over 2x minus 11. Okay, so in this one, I want it to go through my equation. I want it to go through this point, and I want it to be perpendicular to this line. So first, let's identify the slope that it was given to me, which is a positive 4. So let's figure out what our perpendicular slope has to be. Opposite reciprocal. Well, this slope is a positive 4, so if it's a positive, mine has to be a negative. Reciprocal, flip it. 4 is not a fraction, so let's turn it into 1 by putting it over 1. So to flip 4 over 1, that's going to give me 1 over 4. So now that I have my perpendicular slope, all I need to find is my y-intercept. So I'm going to use my xy to plug in and solve for b. So my y for my point is negative 6. My perpendicular slope, we said, is a negative 1/4. The x for my point is a negative 5. And we got to solve for b, so that drops down. Okay, so now let's multiply. Negative 1/4 times a negative 5 is going to give me a positive 5 over 4. My plus b drops down. My negative 6 drops down. Okay, so now I have to get rid of that 5 over 4. So it's a positive 5 over 4, so I'm going to take away 5 over 4. So these cancel, so b drops down. And I have a lot of students that freak out at this point, but no big deal. We have a calculator if you need it. Negative 6 subtract 5 over 4. So we have a negative 6, and we're subtracting 5 over 4. So that's going to give us a negative 29 over 4. Doesn't always work out beautiful, and that's okay. All right, so we have our slope. We have our y-intercept, so we can write our equation. Y equals negative 1/4 x. My y-intercept is a negative, so I'm going to put subtract 29 over 4. Okay, so this one, I want it to be perpendicular to the x-axis, and I want it to go through this point. So on these, I always like to draw a picture. This is the x-axis, this is the y-axis. So I want it to be perpendicular to this guy. So let's just draw an example one. If I wanted to draw a line that is perpendicular to the x-axis, which is a horizontal line, I would need a vertical line, which is vux. So if I'm going to write the equation of a vertical line, I know it's going to be x equals, and then look at your point. Which one of these numbers is the x value? Well, it's 2. So the equation is x equals 2. Okay, on example 3, we're going to determine if each of the following are perpendicular. So to tell if these two equations are perpendicular, we have to compare their slopes. So on the first equation given, lucky us, y is by itself, so it's very easy to identify slope. Just look at the number by x. Unfortunately, on the next equation, we're going to have to solve for y. So I'm going to do that by taking away 2 x's from both sides. And that's going to leave me with negative 3y is equal to 11 minus 2x. Then I'm going to get rid of that negative 3 by dividing both sides by negative 3. So I'm going to get y equals. First, I need to take 11 and divide it by negative 3. That's going to give me 11 over a negative 3. So that's going to be I can't talk. A negative 11 over 3. Next, I need to take this negative 2x and divide it by negative 3. Well, a negative 2 divided by a negative 3 is a positive 2 over 3x. So now that y is by itself, I can look at the number beside x and discover my slope. Okay, well this slope has 3 over 2. This slope is 2 over 3. So are these perpendicular? Because they are flipped. But did it do both? Is opposite reciprocal. So this is a positive, which means this one would have to be a negative. So no, they're not perpendicular. It did do the reciprocal, but it has to do both. It has to do opposite reciprocal. So if this is my given slope, this one would have been perpendicular if it was a negative 2 over 3. And I'm just going to draw that symbol for perpendicular. Those are not perpendicular. Okay, on B it says line f of x goes through the points 9, 8 and 5, negative 8. G of x goes through the points 10, negative 2 and 6, negative 1. We want to figure out, are these perpendicular? So first let's find the slope of f of x. So we're going to do y's rise. So this first point, my y is 8, so it rises. And the 9 is going to go below it. Next point, y rises. My y is negative 8. My 5 has to drop below it. So if I calculate this, this is going to give me a slope of a positive 4. So line F has a slope of 4. So now let's find the slope of G. Y's rise. So here's my first point. The y is negative 2, so it rises. And the 10 has to drop below it. Next point is 6, negative 1. The y is negative 1, so it rises. The 6 has to drop below it. And that's going to come out to give me a negative 1/4. So let's compare these guys. F has a slope of 4. G has a slope of negative 1/4. So remember, to be perpendicular, it has to be the opposite reciprocal. Opposite. Does the sign change? Well, this one was a positive. This one is a negative, so the opposite works out. Reciprocal, did it flip? Well, 4 is not a fraction, so I could turn it into a fraction by putting it over 1. To flip 4 over 1, it is 1 over 4, so these are perpendicular. So I'm going to put yes, perpendicular. Okay, on example 4, it says, what is the slope of a line that's perpendicular to y equals 2? Okay, so it's a strange one. My x's are missing. It's y equals, so I'm going to use Hoy. So y equals equations are horizontal lines. So I know y equals 2 is a horizontal line. I'm going to use a different color. If I wanted an equation that is going to, if I wanted a line that is perpendicular to a horizontal line, I would need a vertical line. So vertical is bucks. And it says what would the slope be of that line. So the slope of a vertical line is undefined. All right, similarly, on example 5, it says, what is the slope of a line that's perpendicular to x equals -4? So y's are missing, so that's one of the strange ones. So x equals, that's vux. So I know if it's an x equals equation, it's going to be a vertical line. So x equals -4 is a vertical line. So if I want a line that is perpendicular to a vertical line, I would need to draw a horizontal line. And the slope of a horizontal line is 0.